Hey, fourth grade, it is our last week of the review book. So, if you remember last week, we skipped around a little bit to focus on fractions and decimals. So, this week, we're finishing up any remaining blank pages. So, if you look, we're starting with data, which is on page 7. So, go ahead and flip to page 7 now. And this should be very simple and straightforward. We just have a few notes to put in these boxes about the different graphs. So, that is what we're going to start with. Make sure you have your pencils, highlighters, everything that you need. Pause if you need to.
I was just going to say that, Mrs. Moore. We're going to be writing quite a bit down. So after each graph, you probably want to pause the video and write down the notes that we have on here and then continue watching. So the first graph that we have to do in the fourth grade is a bar graph. And we know you guys have been building bar graphs since I think maybe first or second grade. With the bar graphs, there are just a couple of things that we need to remember. One of the most important things is we have to pay attention to the title and to the scale. So the title is up here at the top. The scale, that includes these numbers right here. So it's kind of hard to see on our screen, but these numbers count up by 1. So the scale, that's what we're talking about when we talk about the scale. We're counting up by 1. Sometimes on bar graphs, we count up by 5s, or we count up by 10s, or maybe even up by 100. So you just have to really pay attention to those numbers. Also on this bar graph, each line has a number. Sometimes we know that that's not the case. So they'll kind of skip count up the graph. So maybe this 1 isn't here. So you have to know that anything that touches that bar is really a 1. So just some things to point out. There's always a title down here on the x-axis and the y-axis to tell you what you're looking at. And when we look at bar graphs, we're really thinking about categories of things. So another thing that we need to remember, it's in pink over here, we can use paper to line up the numbers. So when you get all the way over to this bar, sometimes it's kind of hard to look across and see what number it is. So if you take a piece of notebook paper or computer paper and line it up, you can see exactly where it hits on the scale of numbers. And then the last thing is what I talked about before, pay attention to half bars. So if it hits halfway between 2 of the whole numbers on the scale. Anything else you can think of, Mrs. Moore?
I think that's it. That sounds good.
So those are bar graphs. Next.
All right, line plots. Wow. So we practiced these earlier in the year, and then we kind of hit them again with fractions too. So these can be a little tricky because they look differently. So go ahead and pause and then copy down while I'm either reading it out, or you can just go over it once you've copied it down. So looking here, there's several things to note. The line plot will always have a title based on at the top what it's talking about. And then again at the bottom where it's labeled what those numbers are actually representing. So with the line plot, remember for each data point, it's shown by an X. And then sometimes the 1X can represent more than 1. So in that case, that's not for this one, but some of them will have like a key or a scale saying 1X actually equals 5 students or 5 apples or whatever it is. So the number of X's equals the number of data, like we said. So for the ones like here, 0 and 4, and the fractions or whole numbers or mixed numbers that have no X's above them, that means that did not qualify for this data collection, if that makes sense. So common questions for this would be like, what is the most common? So you can see in the middle, 2 was the most common for hours spent practicing soccer. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 kids that did that, right? Is that right? Sorry.
Yep. I know it is hard to read it on there. Yeah, so 4 kids spent 2 hours practicing soccer. Yes.
Yes. Okay, and then you can see another thing noted. The smallest data point would be 2 kids spent 1 and 3/4 hours practicing. And then the biggest data point, which means they practice the longer time, I'm thinking these kids may be older or they're in a more competitive soccer league or something, would be 2 and 2/4 or 2.5. So like highlighted in yellow, all the ones, you don't even need to take those into consideration because there's no kids that practice soccer for that amount of time. So with line plots, you really just have to pay attention to what the questions are asking. And I know we don't have specific questions for this, but remember that the X above it is representing 1 unless it's noted otherwise on a scale. Is there anything I'm forgetting?
No.
Sounds good.
That looks perfect. And we actually have a couple of examples of some other line plots. And like Mrs. Moore said, we don't have any questions that go with these, but some common questions that you might ask are, what's the difference between the largest tree that was planted, or the tallest tree that was planted, and the smallest? So we could see that 2 trees were 90 centimeters tall, so those would be the tallest trees, and this one down here, the 70 centimeters tall, would be the smallest. Again, Mrs. Moore was talking about this scale right here, so each X represents 1 tree. Sometimes that'll say something like 2 trees or 5 trees, so we've got to pay attention to that. And then this one, you can see that we don't have numbers on each line, so I've got to see how many lines are between the 70 and the 80. So on this one, we would count up by 2, so 72, 74, 76, 78. If I had this line plot in front of me, I would go ahead and label that so that I had it. I had all the numbers going from 70 to 90 so that I knew what I was doing from the get-go.
Awesome. Yes, and this one's similar. The X is still representing 1 butterfly in this case. Another question I'm trying to think of is how many total. A lot of the times you have to add up the total. So that's where you would count each X. And then there's also questions where you'd have to count and then multiply the length. So if the question said something like, what was the total length in inches of all the butterflies? That's where you'd have to kind of add and multiply those numbers. So that one you have to be very careful on.
Right. Yeah, those are the hardest ones. And I know we talk about 5th grade a lot, but I know you guys are going to spend a lot of time with line plots in 5th grade. We kind of give you a little touch of it in 4th grade, and then you build on it in 5th grade. So you're going to be just fine. But like Mrs. Moore was saying, on this one, I'm not going to take the time to do 3 5/8 plus 3 5/8 plus 3 5/8. So we can multiply this out, 3 5/8 times 2, 4, 5, and then add all those butterfly lengths together. So you'll have plenty more practice with it, but we just wanted to make sure you guys understood line plots before heading that way.
Awesome. And then frequency tables. So you can see here, we're talking about favorite colors, tally marks. Those are simple. And notice for the amount of tally marks that are shown, the frequency is the actual number. So this is the easiest one. You just count the tallies, you get the information from a survey. We did a few of these fun questions in class where you went around and collected data from your classmates about different questions. And then make sure the tallies match the frequency. So for this one, what would be the favorite color of this class? Easy, you look at it and you can see blue. The least favorite color, orange. I agree with that. I don't like orange, would be 2 kids. And then if it says how many kids are in this class, you would add up, or whoever participated in the survey, you would add up the total frequency, and then you have your total number of students.
Perfect. All right, and here are our questions for the week, and these focus primarily on line plots because those are the hardest questions. So pause the video and answer the questions for us and come right back. All right, here we go. So on this first one, we're looking at Miss Brown's 4th graders. They're measuring boxes. So you can see that the lengths of the boxes are in feet. You have 3 boxes that are, it's hard to see, 1/4. 1/4 feet long, and then the largest one is 7/8 of a foot long. So then the questions go with that. So number 1, looking at the data above, how many students participated in the activity? So like Mrs. Moore said earlier, all I have to do is count the X's. So the number of X's represents the total number of people that were asked the question or that had boxes. So that answer would be B, 8 people.
Awesome. And then number 2, notice we highlighted the word difference. That means subtract, kind of like we explained. This is a common question. So what is the difference between the longest box and the shortest box? Here's where you want to be careful, because a lot of you are just instantly going to look at 8/8 as the longest and then 0. But are there any data points there? No. So as you can see, we circled longest and shortest. So the longest was 7/8. And this is in feet, and then the shortest was 2/8. So remember, when you're subtracting fractions, does the bottom ever change? Nope. So all we have to do is subtract 7 and 2, which gives us 5/8. I notice it's already in the simplest form. So C, 5/8 is the answer.
Great. Number 3, what is the measurement? So how long is it of the greatest amount of boxes? So here the wording is a little bit weird, but they're looking at which length was the most popular. We call that the mode. It happens the most often. So the mode of this data would be 1/4. So the length of the most popular boxes would be 1/4.
Yeah, and I love that that one is already in the simplest form.
Yep.
All right, we are talking about soccer again. So here we're talking about sports drinks in gallons, and this is talking about the amounts that each team member brought, shown below. So I guess the amount that they're going to drink during the soccer game. All right, so number 4, how much sports drinks was collected all together? Ooh, this is kind of the tricky one that we were warning you about from earlier. So you have to add them all up together. So you can kind of see how we carefully checked off each one as we went. So you kind of just tack it on. So I'd start with 1 plus 1.5, but there's 3 1.5s marked. So this is where you have to be careful. So I know that 2 halves equal a whole. So 1 plus 1 whole. So we're at 1.5, 1.5. Then I add 2 2s. So 1.5 plus 4, 5.5, and you keep going up. And then you can see we showed the math there, and it should be D, 20 gallons. So
Good.
hopefully you did that one carefully. If you missed it, then you probably just forgot to add what it was worth instead of just adding the amount that was above it. So just
Right.
double check on that one.
And you can't see Mrs. Moore's paper or my paper, but we have tons of work. So this was kind of like our final amounts that we put together at the end to show you. But this takes a lot of room and you've got to be super careful.
My paper is really messy looking at it.
All right, number 5, if every player was counted in the data, how many players were on the team? Again, that's just like that first one. I just have to count the X's, and even this guy that forgot his juice or whatever it was, his sports drink, he's still on the team. He just left his water bottle at home. So I still need to count him as a person in my data. So when I count all the X's, my answer is C11.
Awesome. I hope someone gave some water to him.
I hope so too. Poor guy.
Oh man. All right, number 6, the last one. What was the largest amount that the player brought in gallons? So again, you're looking for that largest amount. Well, no one brought 4. No one brought the 3.5. So one kid brought 3. So that kid was the most hydrated. So D is the correct answer. 3 gallons. Wow, that's a lot. Hopefully that kid shared with the 0 kid.
I hope so. That is an awful lot. He was very prepared for the game. So that is it. Here is your data information. We're going to do a video every day. And then this week you have a choice board again with 4 activities, if I can pull that up. So please submit your 4 activities. These kind of span a variety of skills because that's what we're finishing up this week. So take a peek at the ones that you think are going to help you the most. All the resources are in Schoology, and have fun with it. And anything else, Mrs. Moore? Are we good?
See ya. Send us those pictures for the ones that tell you to.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Bye.
Oh, I got to find the stop button. All right. Bye.